Hello, I'm Peter Labrie, aka Peter03102, and today is Wednesday, October 6th of 2021 at about 1 p.m. This video is going to be streamed live to both Facebook and YouTube, and I'm going to make a few comments about Milley's testimony. That's General Mark A. Milley, who is the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. He gave testimony on the 28th of September of 2021. I'm going to be reading his testimony from a transcript from a website, rev.com. That's rev.com. That'll be linked in my blog, which you'll find a link to below this video. I routinely communicate with my counterpart, General Lee, with the knowledge and coordination of civilian oversight. Obviously, civilian oversight means the Secretary of Defense, either Mark Esper or Chris Miller, depending on which phone call it was. Because Secretary of Defense would be taken from as a civilian appointed by the President, and he would be his civilian oversight and civilian boss. Also, the President of the United States would need to know about this. The calls on 3rd of October and 8th of January were coordinated before and after with Secretary Esper and Acting Secretary Defense Miller's staff and interagency. So I'm not sure if he actually spoke to the Secretary of Defense, Esper and Miller, or if he spoke to their staff. But their staff would be the OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which is a lot of people. I would assume if he did speak to the staff, he spoke to the upper level people. But anything he communicates has to come from the President or Secretary of Defense. So I'm not sure why he would be talking to the staff. All functions in the Department of Defense are performed under the authority, direction, and control of the Secretary of Defense. You coordinate with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, but you have your own duties. So the JTS, which he is the head of, and which is the Joint Chief of Staff, and the OSD, which is the Office of the Secretary of Defense, can coordinate things with each other, but they're still under the Secretary of Defense. All communications come from the President or Secretary of Defense. So anything he communicates has to come from the President or the Secretary of Defense. Only the President and the Secretary of Defense can assign a duty. So this duty that he's performing was assigned by both the President and the Secretary of Defense. I am certain Trump did not intend to attack the Chinese, and in it, this is what he's saying. I am certain that President Trump did not intend to attack the Chinese, and it's my directed responsibility by the Secretary to convey that intent to the Chinese. I'm not sure if he means the Secretary of Defense or he means the Office of Secretary of Defense. In either case, because it's not very clear by what he's saying. But yes, the communication would have to come from the Secretary of Defense. The Office of Secretary of Defense cannot give him a communication that goes to anybody. Then Milley says, as Secretary of Defense Esper's direction, I made a call to General Lee on 30th of October. I'm not sure what the direction is coming from. Is it coming actually from Secretary of State Esper, or is it coming from his staff, which he's already mentioned a few phrases ago? So you mean the direction of the President and Secretary of Defense, Esper. So be President Trump or the Secretary of Defense, Esper. On the 31st, then he states, on the 31st of December, I guess I already trust that. So he states in another place, 11 people attended that call with me, and readouts of this call were distributed to the interagency that same day. Shortly after my call ended with General Lee, I personally informed the Secretary of State Pompeo and White House Chief of Staff Meadows about the call, among other topics. Soon after that, I attended a meeting with Acting Secretary Miller, the Acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, where I briefed him on this call. Yeah, you would have to brief him on what went on in the phone call after the phone call. You would have to brief Chris Miller, the Secretary of Defense. But he's also communicating only what was given to him by the President, Donald Trump, or the Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, because that's the only thing he's allowed to communicate, which I'm not really sure about. Also, all these other people being told are not actually necessary to be told. Only people who need to be told would be the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. His boss, the Secretary of Defense, and the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch. And the Department of Defense is part of the executive branch. This is what's actually in Title 10 of the law of the U.S. Code, which is the law, and the DOD Directive 5100.1, which is detailed in my blog below. Then he says, Speaker of House Pelosi called me to inquire. Of course, he can't actually say anything to Speaker Pelosi that doesn't come from the President or Secretary of Defense, because all communications come from the President or Secretary of Defense. So I guess he must have gotten back to her and made these statements that the Secretary or Defense or the President told him to. And he says, ensure that the President is fully informed on military matters. I would imagine the best way to make sure the President is fully informed is to actually inform the President. I'm not sure the President wasn't fully informed of everything that happened. Was he informed of the phone calls in the first place? Did he know about the communication to China that says that we were going to inform China? The actual communications themselves. Because by the law and by the law Title 10 of U.S. Code and by Directive 5100.1, of course he would know all about this. But I'm not really sure since it's not actually said. And now to finish off, is the China calls a command function, because that's the only function the President and the Secretary of Defense, both of them can give them extra duties, which are command functions. But I don't know if these calls are command functions. Since the OSD, the Office of Secretary of Defense, is specifically given the task of dealing with foreign governments. And also the Department of State has diplomats to deal with foreign governments. So I'm not really sure if this would be a command function, this would be a function for somebody else. The second question, was he given this duty by both the President and Secretary of Defense? Because they're the only ones that can assign him a duty. That's not specifically quoted in Title 10 or in Title 10's Parts 5 and 6, Directives 1, 151, 153, 155, and then 6, 163, 161. Yeah, those would be the directives, the sections of the Title 10. And so you would have to give this duty from the President and Secretary of Defense. Actually, in Title 10, it says it comes from the President to the Secretary of Defense. In either case, both the President and Secretary of Defense would be giving it to him, but he would be under the DOD Directive also. Next question. Did all communications with China and the Speaker of the House come from the President and Secretary of Defense? Because they would have to come from the President and Secretary of Defense, one or the other, and so one of them would know about all the communications. Next question. Was the President and Secretary of Defense fully informed of everything at all times? There's some question about that as far as the President. There are even some questions about the Secretary of Defense. I'm not really sure. This do duty by communicating with the Chinese by phone calls or communicating with any foreign power at all. It's not actually in Title 10, nor is it actually in the DOD Directive 5100.1. So that is why he would have to be assigned it. And he'd have to be assigned it by both the President and the Secretary of Defense. Because there's nothing in there. I searched and searched and there is simply nothing. So, the broad functions of the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff are set forth in Title 10, United States Code, and detailed in the DOD Directive 5100. This is a direct quote from the JCS website, the Joint Chiefs of Staff website, from the page that has to do with the Chairman. The Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is the actual head of all the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And that would be his page on the website for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you very much for listening. My blog below has many more details, and you can actually look at the Title 10, and I put out the relevant passages. And you can look at DOD Directive 5100.1, and you can put out the other passages from that. Anything I express is my opinion or my interpretation from either Title 10 or DOD Directive. So there may be other people who know more about these things than I do. Thank you very much. This is Peter Labrie, over and out.